Hey everyone, my dad made this table about 65 years ago, and today I'm going to make a bigger version of it. This was my dad's nightstand for as long as I can remember. We lost him a number of years ago, and recently my mom moved out of the house into a smaller apartment, and this was one of the things that I wanted. And I don't really need it as a nightstand myself, but I wanted to make a copy of it for fun and to remember my dad. And as I was thinking of how to approach that, I thought about turning it into nesting tables. So this would be the smaller version, and I would make a larger version in the same style that nests over top of it. My parents were married in 1955, and sometime shortly after that, my dad took a night class in woodworking, and this is one of the projects that he made. It's pine. It uses a bunch of different techniques. It has a lift-off lid, plywood bottom, but everything else is solid wood. These two wings are held on with dowels here. There's dowels in the end. There's probably mortises here. The sides taper in. The front is set back here. There's a bit of a reveal. This has a flip open top. It has a simple plywood bottom inside. So I don't really like flip tops because you have to take everything off to access them. So I don't really find them that useful. So I'm planning to make a solid top for mine. I do like how these are thinner here on the edge, and I like how they have this. They stand out quite a bit from the sides. I plan to replicate that. I've had this slab in the corner of my shop for a while. This is cherry. It is almost 16 by 34, and I thought it would be fun to use this for the top. So this is kind of set the dimensions that I'm going to be looking at. So my table is going to be roughly like that, and since this is cherry, I'm going to make my table out of cherry. This is almost 2 inches thick, which is way too thick for what I want. I want something more like 1.5 inches, but it's also got a bow here, which and the piece is too big to fit through my planer, so I'm probably going to rip it down the middle. Then I can run the two sides through the planer to take it down to a thickness that I want, and then I will glue it back together. So this piece is about 24 inches long, about 14 inches tall, 12 to 13 inches deep. I mean, the lid is deeper than the sides. The slab that I had, as I said, it's about 16 inches. Now, it'll probably end up more like 15.5 or 15.25 after I get done ripping it apart and taking it down to size. But that's still plenty because you want it to match up. About 34, 32 inches long is what I'm looking at. I'm going for like living room end table type height. So anyways, I took all the dimensions off of this and I reconstructed it in SketchUp so that I could have a look at what it looked like, and then I built a larger table around it in SketchUp, played with the dimensions and some of the things because I'm not doing a flip top, so I was making one solid top in my plans. And the other thing I changed this a bit. In the small table, this goes right to the floor. In the larger table, I'm going to have this part way up the legs, so we'll still have two regular legs, and we'll have sort of a similar size section with dowels in it. So yeah, that's been a long story. Let's get going. I'm going to start by making the end assembly, and I'm going to start that by making the dowels. And yes, making the dowels. Cherry, walnut, or exotic wood dowels, they're just not easy to find. I don't have a lathe. You can make them with a lathe. I experimented with a dowel plate. That worked okay, though it kind of roughed up the dowel a bit. What actually I'm planning to do is just use the router table. I need 1/2 inch dowels, so I've cut up a bunch of 1/2 inch stock on my table saw, and I need roughly 8 inch. So I've made like 10, 12 inches because this is kind of a wasteful way of doing it. You start the piece, you plunge it in, you bring it to the end and bring it off. And you could, I tried setting up a feather board and just feeding it through, but after a while, there's nothing flat against the fence. So I'm wasting a couple inches at either end of the stick in order to do that. So just so we're clear on what's going on here, this is a 1/4 inch round over. I will come one side, I'll come the other side. We'll do it 4 times. I've got a mark here at the beginning and the end, so you'll start your piece a couple inches into the cut and then move it along to the end until you're here, and I'll pull it out. The end result is not perfect, but it's pretty good. And with a little bit of sanding, I think we will have a pretty round dowel out of this. I need 7 dowels on each side, so I've prepared 7, and I've made like 5 extras. I want them all to be identical, so I cut a whole bunch extra while I had the table saw set up. And so if some splinter or crack or just don't work out, I wanted to actually have a lot of extra on hand. I ran each piece 4 times for the original cut and then 4 more times for a cleanup pass, so there are a total of 8 routing operations per dowel. And yes, I know the camera angle makes it look like I'm sticking my fingers right into the router bit. Trust me, I wasn't. Now in actual fact, I did draw blood, but that was later on when I tried using a stationary belt sander to smooth them. That thing will take the skin off your knuckles before you know it. Sorted through my cherry, pulled out enough pieces to give me enough for the structure of 2 of these ends, running them through the joiner, and then next I'll be running them through the planer. After the cherry was dressed, I took it to the table saw where I could rip it to width and then cut it to length. This is what we're looking for. Something like that. Times 2. So this looks like a fairly simple end, but it's actually a real challenge. It's a real challenge to make. See, if I was just ordinarily making this, I'd, drill some dowel holes or make some mortises or pocket holes, however you're doing it, and then you can attach it together. But I first have to get all these dowels installed, and you can't put them in afterwards, so I'm going to have to drill holes and get these in, and in doing so I have to make sure that everything stays lined up and square, because afterwards I need to bring them together like that. So yeah, even though it looks like a fairly simple thing, this was actually a pretty challenging piece for that woodworking class all those 65 years ago. So I took the dowels to the table saw and I cut all the ends off. So I'm left just with the round dowel that can now be fitted into place. Yeah. I took the top and bottom assemblies to the drill press, and then I drilled 7 holes in each one. I measured the dowels so that there was a 1/2 inch on each end, so I actually drilled 5/8 inch deep holes just to have a little bit of wiggle room. So remember earlier, after I took the dowels off of the router table, I said how they weren't perfect, but they were pretty good. And I stand by that, but I still had to take these to the sander to clean up the ends to be able to get them to go into these 1/2 inch holes. So earlier I talked about how it's important to make sure this is lined up, and I was thinking about that and I came up with this simple jig. So the top board is 4 inches, the bottom board is 3 inches, so that's 7. The dowels are supposed to show 7 inches. I cut them 8 inches long. But anyways, 7 plus 7 is 14. So I took this square piece of wood and I put a lip here on the edge, and I put a nice straight edge here, and these two are exactly 14 inches apart and they're parallel. The idea is I'm going to fit the dowels in, and then I will put the whole assembly and make sure that this is flush and this is flush and this is flush, and I should have something square. Okay, I'm going to glue them in the bottom first, because the bottom is what people are more likely to see. The top, people aren't really going to be seeing it so much because they are looking down on this table. They're not looking up. Trying to spin each one a little bit, get the glue seated. Now I need to spread it a bit to make sure they're the right length. There we go. There we go. Leave that for half an hour and we should be good. After all the dowels are glued in, I had this nice square unit, and then I could lay it out how it was going to be attached, and I could mark for where I'm going to do the joinery. I'm doing dowels. So once I've drilled all the holes, I'm going to do a test fit and make sure everything lined up like it was supposed to. Usually with this jig you want to be putting dowels at the end of a piece, so indexing off a pencil line is not something I do that often. But there we go. Then I can move on to gluing this and clamping this up. Okay, that's one, and that's two. I'm going to let these dry. And I need to taper these legs, but obviously you want to wait until after this is assembled. But I'm even going to wait longer because I first need to get the joinery done for the rails that connect the two leg assemblies. Once that's done, then I can angle in this piece. So I took the end pieces out of the clamps, and I ripped some 4-inch rails for the top, and I was going to tell you all about the joinery, but I checked in this video, like I think I'm already at 12 minutes, and so I actually split the joinery out into a different video, since some people have been asking about my Dowel Max jig. Got my joinery drilled here. Oops. Have a nice 1/2-inch reveal here, which is important because recall these need to be tapered in, so you can't really have it flush up at the top anyways, even if I didn't want the reveal, but I want the nice reveal. So I'm ready to glue this up, but first let's cut the tapers. These legs are 2.5 inches at the top and they're 2.5 at the bottom, but we want to taper down to 2. The original piece tapers from about 1 7/8 at the top to about 1.5 inches at the bottom, so there's about like a 3/8 to a 1/2-inch taper. I just copied that here and I'm doing a 1/2-inch taper. We'll actually see once I get the pencil marks on if I think that's enough of a taper. Because I could make that more of a taper. Let me think about that. Let's go down to like 1 3/4 inches. What if I did that? No, I think I'm going to stick with the original 2 inches. You still want to have fairly solid legs underneath it, so 1/2-inch taper to the bottom. Okay, I'm going to take this over to the bandsaw to cut. You could do it on the table saw if you cooked up sort of a tapering jig. I'll just cut it rough on the bandsaw and finesse it with the sander or the hand plane. and we'll leave this to dry, and then it's on to dealing with the top. Here's that slab. First thing I'm going to do is rip it right down the middle at 8 inches. Then I'm going to plane it down. Do some imagining. One of the things I want to decide is if I'm going to put a maple racing stripe down the middle. I kind of like putting maple together. It's kind of the thing that I like to do, but we'll see what looks good once we get it in real life and what suits the project. So it's the next day, and as you can see, I went with the maple stripe down the middle. In part, this allowed me to bring the width back up to 16 inches, which is what I really wanted. But also my wife and I talked about it, we had a look at it, and I really like the way maple and cherry look together. It's kind of a little bit of my trademark that I put it together in a lot of projects, so I think it's appropriate that in my version of a table, which is a replica or a partner for my dad's table, to make it personal that way. Okay, fingers crossed, I got my saw set up for the cutting operation that I want to do on the tabletop. I'm trying to make the equivalent of these tapered ends here. And let me bring in the camera closer. Along the this is the bottom of the table, and this is the top of the table. Along the bottom of the table, I have a mark at 2 1/4 inches. Along the edge of the table, I have a mark that is 3/4 of an inch down from the top. There's an old pencil line here. And this is a sled that I had for making raised panels, so I already had it, but the angle was wrong, and rather than make up a whole new sled, I've got the table clamped firmly to the sled, and then I tilted the saw blade about 8.5 degrees. I took a piece of wood and I laid it against the blade so that I could mark along the board and see where the blade was going to cut. So I'm going to be probably taking a few passes a little bit at a time, and I expect it's going to burn, so I think I'm going to then nudge the fence over and make another pass. After the first pass, I stopped to check to make sure it was right by the line, or at least close enough by the line. And there's the end results. I think it turned out pretty good. And yes, that was pretty nerve-wracking. I measured, I had everything clamped, I ran a test piece through, and I was still nervous when I actually made the cut. But it turned out great. So I'm going to now hit the whole top with a round over bit, and then I will sand it, and then we'll get on to mounting it on the table. And after a little bit of sanding, here we are. It's not finished or attached yet. I'm going to apply the finish, and then we'll bring you back. Like that. So I put on 3 coats of polyurethane, 4 coats actually on the top, because that's going to need it, 3 coats on the inside and everything else. Used my biscuit joiner to cut some mounting slots here. I'm going to use these table clips for attaching the top. And as usual, I label my product with my name and the year using the laser printer toner transfer method. Turned out great, but you really need to see it with the inspiration. Here is my dad's table from 65 years ago. Both have the top with the flared ends on it. Both have the same front. They both have the spindles in the side. This one goes right to the ground. This one, I have it up there. I think it would, well, I think it looks better like this. And of course, this one has the flip lid, which is still accessible. So, and that brings us to the end of this project. This was kind of a personal journey because it was, you know, I wanted to take my dad's piece and make my own interpretation of it. So I really appreciate everybody who's come along and had a look at my video. I hope you found something interesting. Again, it's kind of a personal piece, but in case you're interested, I have put together a set of plans that have got all the measurements and dimensions of this piece. And even though I didn't build it, I've also got all the dimensions of this piece put together, and you can find that on my website, and the links for that are down in the description below. So again, thanks for stopping by. We'll see you on the next one.